Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David E.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, aloha and good morning. Thanks so much for tuning in here on this Wednesday morning. I'm Ryan Kalei Suji, joined by Yunji Denise, and you're watching Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. And Yunji, as we head into spring, we know that this time of year also means that we are winding down at the legislature with a flurry of bills that are going through and crossing over to the different houses as both sides head into the conferencing moments of the session in just a few weeks. We're joined by two guests today to talk a little bit more about that.
That's right. We are going to be talking money today with Senator Donovan Dela Cruz and Representative Sylvia Luke. We've asked them both because, of course, they are the finance chairs in their respective chambers. And so we want to get straight to business. Representative Luke, let's start with you. You know, we started out a year or so ago thinking that the state would be in a huge deficit. The governor sending some warning signals out that it could take years to crawl out of our financial hole. Now it turns out we have a lot more money than expected.
Yeah, just 2 years ago, we were in a place where we were looking at basically a $3 billion deficit, and what a difference 2 years has made. And it's a combination of the significant amount of federal relief funds. It's a combination of some of the tourism activity coming back. And it is really about us being prudent in the early years to set aside funding for rainy day fund and others. And so we look forward to coming out of this pandemic, making the economy stronger and putting investments where we really need it.
And let's talk a little bit about some of those investments specifically. One of the things that the governor had called for and included within his version of the budget was sort of this rebate of $100 that will go to residents that qualify. Senator, where are you folks with those discussions? And if there's any information that you can share about some of the ideas that you folks have come up in your version of this?
Well, the Senate still has control of the budget, but there's a Senate bill that just passed the House Finance Committee, which will allow the House Finance Chair and I to work on some details on a tax rebate or somewhere between $250 million or a little bit above that will provide some relief to our taxpayers.
Okay, and Representative Luke, can you weigh in with some more details on that proposal? What will it actually mean to folks on the ground? I think when the governor first proposed that $100, it sounds nice for everyone to get $100, but it seemed like that proposal kind of died. What's different about what you're looking at now?
So we're just happy to announce that Donovan and I just had discussions about where is the budget going to go, what are some of the investments that we're planning to make. What was really significant about 2 years ago is that the federal government provided individual tax relief for individuals making, basically $100,000 or less. I think part of the economic activity that we're seeing is the investments that the federal government made to ensure that some of the monies were returned to the taxpayers. We take that seriously. And so both Yunji and Ryan, you'll be the first one to hear that both Donovan and I have recently committed to entertaining rebates again. So what we're looking at is for individuals making $100,000 or more, there will be a $100 tax rebate. And for individuals making less than $100,000 a year, we are looking at somewhere along the lines of $300 in rebate. What that means is for a family of four if the two of the households are making less than $100,000 for a family of four, this could mean as much as $1,200. And we will be working with the departments and the governor's office to see if we can do tax relief right away. And we are cognizant about the high gas prices and cost of living. And so Donovan and I are very committed to this. And, we wanted to let you folks know before any other news station. So you'll be the first one to break this news.
Well, thank you for saving that information for us. And interesting to hear that plan. We'll definitely be tracking that as it makes its way through both of the committees. And as we said, going into conferencing. Senator, going back to some of the other things that the governor has also called for, he called for $1 billion to be tucked away into the rainy day fund. We know that the Council on Revenues projections are higher in tax revenues from what was then when the governor created his budget. Do you support this idea by the governor? And if not, how much do you think should be set aside based on the current projections and calculations?
Well, we still currently have the Senate budget. One of the things that we are looking at is some a deposit into the rainy day fund. We're going to need a vehicle for that. So that's something that we're currently looking for so that we can make sure that we can make that deposit. There are other big ticket items that we hope to put monies into, and that would be debt service, that would be prepayments for ERS, and prepayments for EUTF. What's difficult about all of this is every time you do a prepayment to something else other than the EBRF, because of the maintenance of effort requirement by the federal government, 26% of that amount that we put in, 26% of the budget has to be committed to the Department of Education, and about 6.5% need to be committed to the University of Hawaii. So it's a little bit tricky because the more money we put into some of these things, including the tax relief, we also have to consider what we're going to give the Department of Education and the UH.
And I want to follow up with you, Senator, just for a second, if you could explain those acronyms, because I think a lot of folks watching might not be too familiar with all of what what those stand for.
Okay, so debt service, that's when we borrow money, like a mortgage, to go pay for our roads, for our buildings. And every year we borrow some money and we have a payment schedule. We put that as part of our budget. So we want to try to commit some monies toward paying down our debt service. Early retirement fund, we have a commitment to pay that off. As time goes on, we want to get ahead of the game and actually put some money toward that. That'll save the taxpayers money in the long run. And EUTF is the medical side of benefits. We also want to make sure that we can get ahead of the game in that and do some prepayments for that as well.
Yanji, let me just add to that. One of the requirements by the federal government in receiving federal relief money was that whatever we spend in non-UH and non-DOE, we had to make sure that about 26% equivalent proportionate amount goes to Department of Education, and about 4 to 5% goes to UH. The reason for that is the federal government required that if we are to receive federal funds, it could not come at the expense of our educational institutions. So unlike any other year, any amount that we set aside, we have to set aside about 30% to make sure that they get a proportionate amount. So just to give you an example, we said we are planning to commit $600 million for the HHL, for the HHL waitlist. What that means is that we also have to set aside 30% equivalent of that amount to DOE and UH. So that comes out to, let's say, 600. So that's about 200 million, right? It's a third. So about 200 million of that has to be set aside for UH and DOE.
Well, I'm sure that officials at the University of Hawaii and Department of Education are pleased about those types of numbers and getting, of course, more support. You mentioned, Chair Luke, about DHHL. I wonder if you can expand a little bit about that. We know that this was a priority for both houses going into this session about that $600 million commitment that was set aside by the legislature. But there are also other areas of this budget bill that support the department. If you can share a little bit more about what some of those vehicles will be.
Yeah, you're so correct, Ryan. In addition to the $600 million, which is specifically to address the wait list, we have also put in the budget about $10 million for homestead services, because we understand that, many of the homestead communities still need many of the services to be taken care of. In addition to that, we also made capital improvement commitments to do additional lot development and lot purchase. So in addition to the $600 million, there's substantially more amount that's going into DHHL.
And Senator Dela Cruz, I want to follow up on the DHHL monies. What are your views? We had Tyler Gomes on here from that department on Monday, and he talked about different scenarios of how that money could be spent depending on the kind of requirements that the legislature puts on that money. Do you think that there should be specific provisions as to how that money is allowed to be spent, or should the department essentially be given the money and spend it as they see fit? Gomes was talking about how under one scenario, if it has to go to pure lots and housing, it could, it would be probably about 3,000 people would be moved off that list. But if they could, for example, do a buyout where they would give a beneficiary $100,000 to go toward mortgage or a down payment, then they could actually reach closer perhaps to 5,000. What are your view on putting some parameters around that money?
So right now, there are two different proposals, but the Senate proposal includes a combination. So there are some specific projects that we're looking at. We asked the department what can be built by 2028. They gave us a list of projects throughout the state. So we're committed to funding those projects so that we can make sure that lots and homes are going to be available for beneficiaries. But in addition to that, we also included about $112 million for the very thing that you're talking about in regards to down payment assistance or mortgage payment assistance, so that if a beneficiary accesses $100,000 from that account, they would be taken off the wait list.
And just to follow up on that, Senator, and just this overall contribution, this is significant in the sense that this is the largest contribution made to the department in some time. But we know that there will still be many names on this wait list in the future. What do you think is the long-term solution to this? Or do you think that the legislature will continue to be able to support the department with investments like this in the future?
Yeah, we want to just make sure that whatever we fund, it's going to be effective so that we can get the wait list down. They've surveyed many beneficiaries who have committed that they would like to see the down payment and mortgage assistance, and they would participate with that. Almost half of the people on the list said that they would want that. So that already takes care of over 12,000 people who may be interested in taking the down payment assistance. So if we combine that with the investments into lot development and development of homes, we believe we can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. We were talking about at the start of the program this idea of giving folks a rebate, but at the same time, we're also looking at perhaps increasing taxes when it comes to the capital gains tax. Representative Luke, what are your views right now on where that stands about increasing taxes at a time when some people people are always going to be opposed to that, or at least some, at least the ones getting taxed, but especially when the state has so much of a revenue surplus, the idea of raising taxes, even if it is on wealthy individuals, might be met with some opposition. What's your view on the capital gains measure right now?
Yeah, I think our focus really is helping working families and making sure that we provide tax relief for working families, and that's why we are looking at the rebates, and we are also looking at EITC and making it refundable and making it permanent. I think this year we are concerned about impacts on economic activity and what tax policies will have on economic activity. So I think as we close out the session, any kind of tax increase during this time will not be favorably looked at, only because what we want to do is continue to grow the economy so that we can provide more tax relief for our working families.
With this budget and what we're looking at from the Council of Revenues, after the pandemic, many departments have had to make some cuts, and hiring of positions were also put on hold. Senator, does this budget restore the majority of those departments that, like the DOE or any other department that may have been impacted by the pandemic, specifically regarding personnel and the hiring of positions?
So I would probably say yes and no. Know that we are not looking to restore positions that are no longer needed in today's time and space as we look to transform and modernize government. We're asking the departments to look at different types of positions that will be more effective, more efficient in providing services. One example is within the Department of Education and the Department of Accounting and General Services, they have project engineers, which are very difficult to fill, and the salaries cannot compete with the private sector. So some of the things that we're talking about is maybe instead of project engineers, let's look at project managers, which will open up the opportunity for many people to apply for those jobs. They won't need an engineering degree, but they'll know how to manage projects. Those are the type of discussions that we're having with the departments as we try to look at positions that we want to strategically add back to the budget.
Yunji's actually muted right now.
Apologize for that. I want to get back to the proposal, the rebate that you're talking about. And Representative Luke, I think that Senator Dela Cruz said it was in the ballpark of $250 million. Can you talk a little bit about what this will actually cost the state? What are your projections on that?
Right. So because it's a
work in progress.
Right. We're providing a $100 rebate for individuals making over $100,000 and $300 rebate for individuals making less than $100,000. The amount comes out to about $250 million. I think $250 million is a good investment during this time, especially, people are continuing to struggle with high gas prices and the cost of living. And we are working with the governor's office and the department to see if the rebates can happen sooner than later, as opposed to waiting for the next tax filing.
And Chair Luke, another thing that the governor in his State of the State spoke a lot about was investing in broadband and making that a priority in his version of the budget. Does the legislature agree with this? And has there been any funding that has been reflected in this current version of the budget?
Yes, we completely agree. So we have already been working with both the Broadband Office and the University of Hawaii to look at what is the future of broadband for the state of Hawaii. In 2019, Hawaii actually ended up having no broadband and internet service for a day. And, we need to make sure that that never happens for the state of Hawaii. As you can see, just the last 2 years, we have been so dependent on these type of Zoom meetings and virtual meetings. And I think broadband will continue to be a big equalizer and provide a lot of opportunities for our future generation as well. So imagine, people, kids living here can actually live here and have work out in the mainland or work internationally. So this is what broadband can do. The federal government provided about $200 million for us to do broadband expansion. In the budget, we have provided about $33 million as a matching fund because the federal government required matching. So we will be working with the university and the broadband office to just in the next several years how we expand broadband into remote areas or increase broadband services even in the business community and throughout. So this will be an exciting project. It is a long-term project. Clearly we cannot spend all 200 to $300 million in one sitting, but it will be planned out for the next several years, and it is very exciting.
I asked earlier about the capital gains tax increase. I wanted to ask you about another potential tax increase, and that was about a carbon tax. There had been talk, especially because here in Hawaii, we feel the effects of climate change, and there are pushes to increase the carbon tax, obviously to move the needle toward renewable energy. But at the same time, Chair Luke, you did talk about the high gas prices, which we are all feeling right now. What is your sense of where a carbon tax could be, or are you thinking that won't be happening this session?
We have not seen a carbon tax. There were legislations proposed, but we have not seen continued discussion of the carbon tax this year. There might be, Senator Dela Cruz, is there any bills remaining on the?
Yeah, I don't think
we haven't seen anything
alive yet for that kind of discussion. But one thing I do want to point out is that the discussions that Sylvia and I are having on a lot of the tax relief measures, there's also a federal requirement on recruitment. So just like how we talked about the maintenance of effort for the Department of Education and the University of Hawaii and making sure that they keep at a certain percentage, the feds will allow the states some flexibility in providing tax relief, but we may need to balance that out with increasing taxes. That's why some of those bills, unfortunately, are still on the table. But we're really working strategically to make sure that we won't have to comply with that recruitment mechanism that's required by the feds, so that we can provide relief and not impact the budget.
Can you explain that just a little more detailed? I'm a novice when it comes to all of this. I know Ryan is old hat when it comes to the Capitol, but I'm much more of a spectator on this sport. So can you explain what those federal requirements are and how you could bypass them without having to raise taxes?
So the recruitment would mean every time we provide tax relief, we would also have to make sure that we have new tax revenues coming in. So it would have to be a 1-for-1. But the feds do allow some flexibility. For fiscal year 22, we cannot exceed $300 million in relief. That could include credits or whatever the case may be. And in fiscal year 23, we cannot exceed $400 million. So as long as we're below those thresholds, we can provide some mechanism for relief.
Want to talk about another tax that has been brought up, and that is more specifically for those who live outside of the state. There has been some talk about potentially adding in a visitor tax or a travel tax of some sort to really place some barriers and limitations for those who are entering the state as tourists to help control the amount of visitors that we see. Representative Luke, we'll start off with you. Is this something that you think is feasible, that we could essentially be at some point taxing people or creating a fee, if you will, for those who may want to visit the islands and experience Hawaii?
Right. So the concept of green fee has been discussed. I think if we're looking at some of the reports from The Economist, by 2025, Hawaii will again see 10 million tourists or more. I think it is prudent for us to look at ensuring that tourists who arrive on our shores pay their share of taxes, and ensure that we use those tax dollars for natural resource protection and management. In lieu of that, so those concepts are still being discussed. In lieu of that, what we have done just yesterday is we passed a bill, and that will be going over to the Senate, where we are allocating a portion of the TAT, a significant amount for natural resource protection. And the amount that we passed yesterday was $60 million to be set aside for that purpose.
I want to see if we can expand a little bit more upon that, specifically with the changes that were made to the TAT. I mean, the legislature did come under some criticism by those who are against the restructuring and the way that the counties would be able to add their own share of that. We'll start with you, Senator. What have you heard thus far about this new structure and the way that things are working out overall with the counties and also on the state level?
Well, many of the members like the fact that it's more transparent. Before, HTA did not have to present their budget to the legislature. They had a fixed amount of TAT that went directly to them. We really believe that they need to present their plans, how they want to spend their money, so that we can make sure that it's consistent with what the public is requesting. As Sylvia said, lots of people want to make sure that we're focusing on the quality of life, making sure that our environment is protected, making sure that our natural resources are protected. And that's where the HTA has changed focus. We want to make sure that focus is going to continue to be changed in that direction. And so we really appreciate the fact that they now have to present their plans and their budget to the legislature.
Chair Luke, when you were talking about these projected revenues, that one of the things is to be cognizant of course, is that they are projected. And, we see the situation happening in Shanghai, for instance, where basically it is completely shut down. You have 26 million people there under lockdown. In Europe, you have the BA2 variant of the Omicron, the second variant of Omicron. We could see some of these potential gains evaporate. How do we ensure that we are prepared if we are in a situation where we don't get 10 million tourists because of another, curveball from COVID? When you're looking at putting money aside into the rainy day fund, how do we make sure that we're structurally sound, financially sound rather, given all the uncertainty that we've seen just even in the last 2 years?
Right. So just in the last several years, the House and the Senate, and thanks to Chair Dela Cruz, we were able to set aside a significant amount into the rainy day fund. And I think because of those commitments and some of the investments that we have made during even the shutdown, it could have been way worse, and we were able to get into a situation where we didn't have to make substantial amount of cuts or increase taxes to get out of it. So we are still committed to setting aside some funding into the rainy day fund. It may not be to the $1 billion that the governor asked for, but it is still good, prudent policy for us to do that. We need to make long-term investments. So this is a time for us to look at investing in, whether with the amount of revenues coming in, we need to make infrastructure investments. We need to make sure that we set aside money to take care of backlog in R&M, and because these are investments that we can make that will help in the future. So we are looking at different things that will not completely burden the state, but relieve the state of future obligations.
We're almost out of time, but before we let you go, I wanted to just kind of talk on a personal level with both of you. You both chair, of course, the Finance and Ways and Means Committee. We've seen leaders in these roles that have had some difficulties in agreeing to what their version of the budget should look like and what one might be. You two have had the opportunity to work together for some time now, and this will be the last session working with Chair Luke, Senator Dela Cruz, as she seeks higher office and will be giving up her seat. I wondered if you can just share a little bit about the dynamics between the two of you and working through the budget over the years and how things have gone and looking into the future, what you see as a maybe potential future counterpart that you'd be working with.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate and respect Chair Luke. She has a broad depth and of what the state needs. She knows how the state departments work. She understands state government. She's open-minded. She's flexible. She's very creative. She's very results-oriented, and in concept, just because of the way she operates, we are able to reach an agreement because I appreciate what she's trying to do, and I believe that she wants what's best for the state. So knowing that that's where she's coming from, it's very easy to work with someone with that kind of aptitude and that kind of approach. So I'm going to miss her, but I know I'll be working with her in another capacity.
Yeah. So Donovan and I had really a good working relationship. I think when Donovan first became WAM chair, people were wondering, okay, how are we going to get along? But, he's very straightforward, and, he tries to integrate so many pieces together. So whether it's workforce and whether it's renewable energy, it's amazing how, you see him work and how you integrate so many things. And it's been a real pleasure. And the fact that you have a good relationship with, between the House and the Senate money tiers is really important, because a lot of times, people think there's leveraging and there's standoffs, and, we don't really have time for that. And so it's been a pleasure working with Senator Dela Cruz. And, I think, I'm going to miss working with him. And so, yeah.
Well, Senator Donovan Dela Cruz and Representative Sylvia Luke, thank you so much for joining us this morning to talk about the budget, the priorities for the state, and that big announcement that we could be looking at potentially $100 to $300 for every tax filer as a rebate. And that could be coming, you said, even sooner than the next tax season. I think that would probably be welcome news by many. So thank you so much both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank
Aloha.
you for inviting us.
Well, great to hear from them. As you said, Yanji, that announcement that just came through, they said that they are making that official announcement here on the show, which we always appreciate when we are able to break news like that. But really, it is just an illustration of a further expansion of what the governor had initially proposed. And you heard their plans for this. And a lot of that is due in large part to the latest projections by the Council of Revenues that forecasted just a more budget overall to work with, if you will, with this opportunity to provide that for those residents here in the islands to get that $100 or $300, depending on where you fall within that threshold. But that is something that we know that we thought was pretty much dead for this session, but them announcing that they had just made this decision as earlier this morning.
Yeah, and going beyond what the governor had proposed. The governor's proposal, of course, was $100 per tax filer, and now we're looking at up to $300 for those folks who make less than $100,000 a year. That will cost the state about $250 million. It comes at a time when, of course, residents are facing very high gas prices because of international events. And they say that it is needed in the pockets of people throughout the state. They say their focus right now is helping working families. Another, of course, subset of working families that they really hope to help are those of Native Hawaiian ancestry through helping the Department of Hawaiian Homelands that measure to provide $600 million to the department, whether that is with a lot of strings attached and having to build homes, or perhaps going in the form of allowing for some flexibility for the department to determine what the beneficiaries get. It sounds like that is the direction that they are leaning in. In that case, beneficiaries could get $100,000 to go toward rent, mortgage relief, or a down payment. And that, of course, as Tyler Gomes said earlier this week, could uplift up to 5,000 people off that list.
Yeah, we heard them categorize that as a buyback sort of program that they wanted to really ensure that it is the Hawaiian community being able to utilize the state funds and that payment to buy back some of that land and use that money for those types of purposes. But in all, it sounds like these two who hold very powerful positions remain committed to this commitment to support the department as a whole and moving forward, trying to find ways where they can cut back on that wait list, as they said that was going to be a priority of this session, and sounds like that will continue to be as they move into conferencing days in the weeks ahead. We also heard, of course, about a number of things that I think this for the first time there was a lot of overlap in what the governor had proposed and what the legislature is actually moving on. We heard about the investments to broadband as well, that they are going to continue with that. That was a big part of the governor's speech as well. And they're still looking at the rainy day fund and just how much money they can set aside for that, but recognizing that there needs to be some money that needs to go back into there, as well as paying off some of the other areas that, of course, will need to be looked at, including EUTS and other portions of the budget that also need to be restored and funded during this time. And so great to hear from them. And again, great to hear their overall working relationship. Again, as we noted in the past, these two positions have not always gotten along. And we've seen illustrations of that as things get really contentious down the line. But you hear about their working relationship, which overall I think helps everyone when these two can get along and are able to communicate in the way that they have been over the years.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate their time this morning. We know they are very busy as the session is coming to a close pretty soon. Another big ticket item facing Hawaii residents, of course, is rail. And Mayor Blangiardi on this program, and of course in his State of the County address, talked about ending the rail in Kaka'ako. So will the FTA agree to that? And what does that mean for the route and ridership? We're going to be talking on Friday to Heart Board Chair Colleen Hanabusa. We always love getting her perspective on the project. She definitely is very candid in her assessments. And so we wanted to get her perspective on the proposed route changes, and also just the project overall and how it is moving forward.
Now, looking forward to that conversation. We thank you for joining us here today. We'll see you right back here on Friday. Aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Longstrugs.